When I was in high school, I used to travel into school on the bus into Lismore from my hometown Corroci. And when we'd get to school, we'd play basketball. And because all the Corroci kids turned up at the same time, it was always the Lismore kids versus the Corroci kids. Now, Corroci is a small town about 20 minutes out of Lismore, and we were kind of the scum. Lismore itself can be pretty gross when it floods, but Corroci was one step worse, because all the festive floodwater from Lismore would then make its way down to Corroci. So we were the backwash of Lismore. And it meant Corroci was somewhere you'd live if you didn't have a lot of money, or if you just weren't very smart. You were just that kind of person. So all the Lismore kids, they'd line us up for basketball and then just thrash us. Now, in our passage, Paul seems to be saying that the Corinthian church were kind of like people from Corroci. Corinth, Corroci, kind of sound familiar. This is a church made up of backwater people. They didn't have a lot going on. And so it's funny what Paul starts with here. He says, consider your calling, brothers. Now when I hear the word calling, I usually think of something important, like a high calling, or I was called to the ministry. It's something important and can suggest you're a cut above the rest. And there is something important about the Corinthians' calling here. But actually first, Paul's saying, consider the life you were called from. Consider your humble beginnings. He's saying you were called from the backwash, brothers. From verse 26, not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are. Now, Paul seems to be having a go at these guys in a way. He might as well have said, you're a bunch of pathetic losers. So far, he said, you're not wise, you're not strong, your family's unimportant, you're foolish, you're weak, and you're low and despised. It sounds a bit rough. But I think Paul's setting this up, kind of like that scene in Toy Story where Woody finds all the creepy toys under Sid's bed. There's that freaky hairless baby's head stuck on a mechanical spider, and the duck's head screwed onto an action man's body. There's that weird Barbie doll-legged crane toy. There are a whole lot of mismatched toys, unlikely to have your kids impressed. But these mismatched toys, they end up playing a role in Woody's plan, don't they? And see, that's what's going on with the Corinthians. They were the low and despised, but God used them to shame the wise, to shame the strong, to bring to nothing his enemies. And in verse 29, we get to God's purpose for his mismatched church. It's so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. See, God won't be rivaled by the wise or the powerful or the highly regarded of the world. He won't put up with their boasting. Instead, Paul tells us God uses the mismatched losers, those who have nothing to boast about, to shame those who do. His whole point here is that no one should have anything to boast about. No human being will boast in God's presence, and especially not those who think they hold the wisdom and the power in the world. And in verse 30, we come to a kind of turning point. And Paul says, you know what? Actually, you do have something to boast about. If you're going to boast, you can boast in the Lord. Because from verse 30, Paul says, because of God, you are in Christ Jesus. Why is that important? Well, because Jesus is wisdom from God. Look, there were a whole lot of wise people in Corinth at the time. There's all sorts of philosophy and teaching and learning going around. Lots of excellent orators. It was a bit like our world. We've got all these smart people. We've got TED Talks that you can listen to. You've got Jordan Peterson. But Paul says that's not wisdom. But righteousness, sanctification, redemption, now that's wisdom. Why? Well, the wise of the world, they stand on platforms seeking applause. But Jesus hung on a cross, surrounded by scoffers, to die for their sin, to offer us righteousness. The powerful people of the world are served by many, but Jesus came as a servant. to do for us what we couldn't do ourselves. And he serves us each day, helping us to grow to be more like him by his Spirit. That's the sanctification that Paul's talking about. And the wise and the powerful of the world, they make good lives for themselves, but it's at the expense of others. Jesus came for redemption, to offer his body on the cross for the forgiveness of our sin, and we now share in the life to come at his expense. This is the wisdom of God. And so Paul says, remember your calling, brothers. You were the low and despised. You were weak and thoughtless. But God has called you into the great plan of his wisdom. So when you find yourself wanting to boast, when you find yourself up against the so-called wisdom of the world, remember your calling and boast in the Lord.